We now know that an American accused of shooting and killing 2 Pakistanis last month is not an embassy employee, as the embassy had originally indicated. He is a CIA contractor.
The CIA director, the head of the Joint Chiefs, and even the president himself are calling for Raymond Davis's release. But inside Pakistan, there's a growing call for the government to stand up to the U.S. and put Davis on trial. Mark Mazzetti wrote about it in the New York Times. He joins us now. And Mark, you seem to know this information a while ago, but the government put some pressure on the New York Times and asked you not to release this information about Raymond Davis. Walk us through everything we know.
Well, Ray Davis is as we said, a contractor for the CIA. He's a security guard working out of a safe house in northern Pakistan in Lahore with another number of other contractors who are protecting and supporting the sort of task force up in that area who are monitoring militant networks in northern Pakistan. And it's an area that the ISI, Pakistan Spy Service, is particularly concerned about because some of the militant groups that are operating in the area that the CIA is spying on actually have been supported by the ISI. So there's this spy versus spy element to it. And this is what's making it particularly dicey as the U.S. tries to get Raymond Davis out of Pakistani custody. Just in terms of over the last week or so, it was only on, I believe, Sunday when we were going to write the story that us and a number of other news outlets went to the Obama administration, said we were going to write this story, and they just asked for less than 24 hours to try to move him to a different place in Pakistan.
Well, that raises a question. So the U.S. is able to move him to a different place in Pakistan?
We're not sure whether they're putting pressure on the Pakistanis to move him. I'm not sure whether they were successful in doing so. He was in a jail cell in Lahore.
And just so I understand it, because I remember reading this line in your piece that American officials had initially asked you to withhold this information about the fact that he works with the CIA and then lifted their request.
On Sunday, as we said, we weren't the only ones who were working on the story. A number of U.S. news outlets were working on the story. And they said, give us a brief period of time. His life's in danger. And if we can pressure the Pakistanis to get him moved, that would help.
Let's go to the story itself. Yeah. Raymond Davis supposedly killed two Pakistanis. What's not clear is were they members of the ISI, were they members of a militant group? You've seen 2 versions of this story. You've done this for a long time. What do you feel like is the best version of events that we know happened on the streets of Lahore?
All we know at this point is that Davis killed 2 people on the streets of Lahore in a busy intersection on January 27th.
That's undisputed fact.
Undisputed. After that, an American SUV, drives up to try to rescue Davis, and in the process kills a 3rd Pakistani. So that is bad enough. And then adding fuel to that fire, one of the widows of one of the victims actually committed suicide after that. So it is something that is, as you said, straining American relations with Pakistan. But getting to the bottom of it is still murky. Who are the people who approached him on foot with guns drawn is unclear. The United States said it was a botched robbery attempt. There have been other indications that they may have been working with Pakistani spies. We don't know that. It's still unclear. The U.S. disputes that. So we're still trying to get to the bottom of exactly what happened, whether Davis had been tailed by these people for some time, whether he felt harassed, or whether it really was just a random incident.
It's interesting because I know when I first focused in on the story and read about what Davis was doing, a former special ops guy, he had on him, a Glock and a telescope. I got to say the first thing I thought was CIA. Isn't the point that the ISI knows that the CIA is there? Everybody knows the spy games that are happening within Pakistan. You just don't want them to spill out into the public? Is that the issue?
You certainly don't want it to spill out into the public. But even the activities that the CIA does in Pakistan are not all blessed by the ISI. Certainly, the drone campaign in the western mountains of Pakistan, to some extent, is blessed by the ISI because the people that are being killed are, in the views of the Pakistani government, enemies of Pakistan. However, when you go into Lahore, you go into Karachi, you go into Quetta, it's much trickier for the CIA to operate because it gets closer to home for the ISI. These are people that the ISI have worked with in the past, and so it's all in the shadows, but some things are sort of countenanced more than others.
How common is it that in some of our, and particularly in some of these difficult, troubled spots, how common is it that they're basically CIA folks embedded in the State Department?
Very common. I mean, the way the CIA has always operated over the decades is that their people operate in embassies under diplomatic cover, and that has given them a degree of immunity in case something like this happens. They can then get sort of spirited out of the country. What's happened since 9/11 is that the CIA has sort of moved out of embassies more, worked in these sort of different, rougher neighborhoods and places where diplomats don't normally go, because if the CIA is doing what it needs to be doing, which is sort of getting a handle on militant networks, they're not hanging out around the embassy, they're not hanging out at cocktail parties. So that's sort of how the CIA is transforming itself, and for good and for ill.
And back to the Davis case itself, how are American officials trying to resolve this now that all this dirty laundry is out in the open? The Pakistanis are furious. They're facing enormous pressure from within. How does this get resolved?
If it was only the decision of Pakistan's president, Zardari, he probably would be out already. If it was only the decision of the military, he'd probably be out. I mean, they put up a fight, but there's a close relationship with the military. They understand how these spy games go on. But it's in the middle of Pakistani politics, where in the north, the opposition to President Zardari is very anti-American, and they're sort of feeding the fire here. And the courts are anti-American, and they're sort of proceeding with murder charges. So Raymond Davis is in the middle of this sort of fury that's out of the hands of, to a large extent, out of the hands of the U.S. government.
Rich, has your reporting indicated that anybody from the U.S. has talked to Raymond Davis or has any awareness of his condition, how he is?
I think that they have some degree of awareness of where he's being held and the conditions he's being held in. I don't know the sort of amount of direct contact they're having.
All right, Mark Mazzetti of the New York Times, with what is on one hand, a fascinating spy novel story, but very serious business.
Thank you.